This is Brother Peter Diamond, vaticancatholic.com. Last week was election day, as most people know, and I just wanted to offer a few quick comments about why I believe that the actual votes are not being used to determine who wins these elections. A while back, we posted some audios concerning the media's presidential election night hoax.
Utah will go for Senator McCain. So will Kansas. It's a traditionally Republican state as well. 6 electoral votes. Kansas, with 15% of the vote, already counted in that state.
Where I expressed my opinion concerning the presidential election and why they do not use votes to determine who wins. But I'm also convinced that the same is true for the congressional races. And the reason for that, it's simply undeniable if you consider what the media tells us about the election. If you watch how they cover the election, they will declare who has won the state, sometimes with as little as 1% or 0% of the actual vote in. Now, that should prompt the question, how does the media know who has won the election with 1% or even 0% of the votes in? And the answer is, if you look into it and you listen to their claims, they claim to be able to know it based on exit polls.
Of the precincts have now reported in Louisiana based on the actual numbers as well as the exit polls. We say Louisiana, that's 9 electoral votes, will go for Senator McCain.
And that is impossible. And before I get into why it's impossible, it should be emphasized that the media is right every time. It's not like they're making educated guesses and sometimes they're wrong. No. What they say when they declare it, it's over. Candidates concede almost every time. It always turns out the way they said it. And basically all the networks declare it at the exact same time.
For Senator McCain, 5 electoral votes in West Virginia. 22% of the vote has actually been counted in West Virginia. 53% so far for McCain, 46% for Barack Obama, 11,240. That's the advantage he has. But based on our exit polls, based on the actual numbers that are coming in, where they're coming in from that state, it's another win for Senator McCain.
So there you have it. They claim to do it based on exit polls, and he said that 22% of the vote has actually been counted. It's rare that they wait that long. They usually wait till about 1 to 2% of the vote. And so you only have about 98% of the vote left, and they're able to tell you who has won based on exit polls. Sometimes it's with 0%. 0% of the actual vote, and they've called who has won the state. And so they claim to be able to do this based on exit polls, and I'm just amazed that more people don't question this. Well, how could they know this based on exit polls? And I looked into it. The exit polling is done by a group called the National Election Pool. Okay, it's a conglomerate of media outlets. They feed all of the networks with the information, the exit poll data, etc. Based on their information, that's how all the networks supposedly can call these elections with 100% accuracy every time, with essentially none of the actual votes. Concerning the 2008 presidential election, they state on their own website that they conduct all of the exit polling for all of the networks, and that they will conduct more than 100,000 interviews on election night. So, that means that they will conduct 100,000 exit polls, as if that's some great number. Well, newsflash, there were 129,912,034 actual votes cast for president in the 2008 presidential election. So they claim to be able to know who has won based on 100,000 exit polls. And exit polls, of course, aren't even necessarily reliable. 100,000 exit polls is 0.07% of 129,912,034 votes. That means that they claim to know, all these networks who say he has won this state, he has won that state, they claim to know based on not even 1%, not even 1/10 of 1%, less than 1/10 of 1% of all the votes. That is impossible. It's a joke. There is no way. They know in advance. They know before the election has even begun who has won. It's all a big hoax. And how is this possible? Some may say, well, with the proliferation of computerized voting machines, it's well documented. You've got people going to the polls. One candidate's name is already popping up. They can't even press the other one. These programmers have explained how easy it is to set the elections, print out fake results. And so they become masterful at shaping the results that they get in because people are voting and making it look believable. But there are always anomalies, and that's why people find undervotes. They find that more votes have been cast than there are people who voted, and it's just a joke. And what's amazing to me is that almost no one even thinks about this. Now, a lot of people bring up the concept of vote fraud, how hackers can get in and mess with the elections, but as far as we know, almost no one else is talking about the concept that, no, they're not just messing with the results as it's going on or after. The whole thing's decided in advance. And as you watch this, it's, to me, pretty transparent. And some may say, well, how come the Republicans won, and how come they have these shifts back and forth when public momentum seems to be upset with the incumbents? They know they have to do that. Their scheme has to be elaborate for it to be convincing. And they realize that not much is necessarily going to change. And in fact, with some candidates, they may say, well, what about a candidate who might oppose this or that, like the Federal Reserve? Well, they're willing to concede a few if there's strong ground support for a particular candidate, and they don't let them in. They have to be very careful not to prompt an investigation that might uncover a larger hoax. So they have to play their game in a crafty way. But the bottom line is it doesn't add up. Whether anyone wants to share the opinion that I'm expressing, it's simply not possible for them to every time call the elections. Every election is called, with rare exception, with less than 10 or 20% of the votes. Most times it's less than 5% of the votes in. Every time they know. It's just amazing, isn't it? And I've asked numerous people, what's your rebuttal to this? Give me a rebuttal how they could possibly know with 100% accuracy who has won each time. And don't tell me about statistics. I understand the legitimate use of statistics. They can register trends. They can give you an idea of how people are feeling. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about them claiming to be able to tell us who is definitively leading a two-man race, not just how a few people feel about a candidate. They're saying this is definitive, who is ahead, and by how much, based on less than 0.1% of the actual votes, and exit polls. It's impossible. It's a complete hoax. Another thing that's amazing is that as they're reporting this, it's like we're in this dream world. They're talking about how the voters broke down, okay? And they're saying our exit polling information has told us that independents broke 55% for the Republicans and 40% for the Democrats. Based on almost no exit polls, you're going to tell us out of huge numbers of people how the independents broke because you interviewed a few of them? That's ridiculous. And everyone buys it. Another thing that's amazing to me is how everyone buys polling in general. I understand that a poll can register trends. That's not how they use them. Let me give you an example. In 2008, just before the presidential election between Obama and McCain, on October 30th, 2008, Fox News ran a big article called Fox News Poll, Obama's Edge Over McCain Narrows. And it says that the race has tightened with Barack Obama now leading John McCain by 47% to 44% among likely voters. So according to this big article, a few days before the 2008 election, it was a 3-point margin. And if you analyze any of this news, you realize that these candidates, these pundits, they all believe this. They're like, well, he must go back to this state to make sure the lead doesn't shrink too much, and he must go over here because he's trailing by 10 points. So they actually believe this stuff. Now, 4 days later, about 4 days later, on November 3rd, the same Fox News comes out with a new poll that says, Obama leads going into Election Day. With just 1 day to go before Election Day, Barack Obama has a 7 percentage point lead over John McCain, 50 to 43. Again, everyone goes by this, and they make predictions on how the election is going to come out based on this. Now, even just when we think about this right off the bat, before we get into the stunning fact I'm going to cover, what did they do in 4 days? They polled all the voters, and then 4 days later, they went back and polled them again, and some of them changed their minds. It's utter stupidity. And then when you read the fine details about the actual poll, guess how many people were involved in this poll? 1,100. That's 1,100 people. They're posting this big article, informing and programming the public about who's leading. There were 129 million votes cast. 1,100 is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket out of 129 million. It's a complete hoax. And they do this all the time. They're even doing it with the new presidential election in 2012. They're already telling you who is favored as the front runner. This is all part of the program. And so that's why I'm convinced, and people can disagree, this is my opinion. I'm commenting about how I believe the election works. And I'm not saying people shouldn't vote. I'm just saying my opinion on what actually they do with it. I don't believe they use the votes. I believe they're totally in control. And actually, I was listening to an interview by a person who is really an expert in how the election is turned over from the election officials to different groups and so forth. And she believes that there is definitely vote fraud on some level. She does not necessarily believe that the whole thing is programmed in advance, as I'm saying. Some of the facts she was discussing coincide with what I'm saying. She was talking about how she was in one state where the election official turned over the entire election to a private company, and that in another state, this private company got remote access to the election computer on the day of the election in order to fix something. So it's logging in basically to just, adjust something as the election is about to begin. And how there are all these anomalies and so forth. And so all of this coincides with what I'm saying, that I don't believe they use it at all. And the smoking gun is that all these networks call it with none of the votes, basically, essentially none of the votes. And it's also interesting how some of these very hotly contested elections, such as the one in Nevada between Harry Reid and Sharon Engel, it turned out to be very close. And they called that race, by the way, with only 24% of the vote in. So, 75% of the vote, 3/4 of the vote, still hasn't even been counted. They determine who has won. And that's unusual. Usually they don't wait nearly till 24%. Usually it's 1%, 5%, 2%, or even 0%, as all of the western states in the 2008 presidential election, California, Hawaii, etc., were called with 0% of the actual votes in. In fact, here's the clip from CNN's coverage of the 2008 presidential election. This clip is at the very moment the polls in the western United States have closed. They only wait until the polls close to call all of these states and the election because they have to. It's obvious that they could have made their, quote, projection much earlier because the whole thing is decided in advance. They declare all of the western states to have been won. And when they do so, notice that they show Hawaii, California, Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. And if you look in the lower part of the screen, in the left-hand corner and in the center, they show 0%. That represents 0% of the actual votes counted. It's a complete hoax.
So in a few seconds, those states will be closing their polls and presumably we'll be able to see what's going on and make perhaps a major projection at that point. This is a moment that a lot of people have been waiting for. This is a moment that potentially could be rather historic. And CNN can now project that Barack Obama, 47 years old, will become the president-elect of the United States. We project he now has enough electoral votes, more than 270, more than enough to become the 44th president of the United States. This little-known U.S. senator only a few years ago, seemingly coming out of nowhere, delivering the Democratic Convention keynote address back at the convention in 2004, all of a sudden taking off for a moment.
Something else that recently came out that supports what I've been saying on this topic for years is a YouTube clip of NBC calling the California election for Democrat Barbara Boxer over Republican challenger Carly Fiorina with only 17% of the vote in. And when they called the election for Boxer, they showed the actual results that they had so far on the screen. And according to the results they had in, Boxer was trailing Fiorina. And they show the graphic. She was behind. Yet they project that Boxer will win and has won. And what do you know? Boxer winds up winning the election. And they called it with only 17%. And the 17% that they had showed that the other individual, Fiorina, was leading.